Okay, so hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about some of the best films that I saw in 2019. Now, when I sat down to record this, I thought, right, let's talk about 2020 films, the year we're in, and then I remembered that nothing's come out this year. So, thanks for that, world. But yeah, 2019 was actually a great year for films in my opinion. I probably went to the cinema more times in 2019 than I had for a couple of years before that. It was kind of a thing that I really wanted to, try and focus on going to the cinema, seeing films when they come out, and making an effort to kind of really see a lot of films in the year. Believe it or not, as a film student and as someone that wants to work in this industry at some point, there was a lot of films that just passed me by and I didn't see. And this was something that I really wanted to address in 2019, hence the choice to start making the effort to go to the cinema. So I'm going to go through 10 films from last year. These are 10 of my favourite films, 10 of the films that kind of impacted me the most for whatever reason, and just 10 films that really stuck with me, after the fact. This list is not in order, so number 1 is not the best, number 10 is not the worst. This is just 10 films that I really think you all should see. Okay, so starting with number 1 and the film that I think actually won Best Picture at the Oscars last year, the film is Parasite. Now, Parasite for me was a great example of a film that I went into knowing absolutely nothing about. The only thing I knew about the film was that it was South Korean and that it was directed by the guy who made Snowpiercer. Now, in the modern day with trailers, when you go to the cinema, with things all over YouTube and stuff, it's actually very hard to go and see films knowing nothing about them. So I was very fortunate in this regard to see Parasite with that frame of mind. And I have to say the film was even better for going in knowing nothing about it. Not knowing what genre a film is can have a massive effect on the film itself, and it really kind of puts the emphasis on the film to tell you or to signpost what it is and what it's trying to be. Now, I think Parasite actually messes with this concept really, really cleverly, and there's definitely times in the film where you go, oh, is this getting, into the horror vibe? Is this getting a bit thrillery? And it kind of just bounces around different genres, which I absolutely love. The film is culturally relevant, it has important messages, it's fantastically acted, the cinematography is fantastic. It is just an all-round very, very good film. The fact that it was foreign language and that it was subtitled made absolutely no difference to me. If anything, it actually increased my enjoyment of the film, as it meant you had to be involved, you couldn't look away, you couldn't go on your phone, you had to read the subtitles, and therefore you were really drawn into the film. There's moments in this film that are genuinely horrifying, and I wouldn't call it a horror film, and I almost don't want to say any more about it than that, so I don't want to spoil it for anyone that hasn't seen it. This is probably the first film I've ever seen where a camera trick, an actual movement of the camera, scared me, and that's something I didn't know a film could do, so really powerful. Stop listening to me talk about it, go and watch Parasite. The second film I'm going to talk about is Marriage Story. This was an interesting film because it came straight to Netflix, something that we're seeing a lot more of nowadays, but certainly wasn't the norm even a couple of years ago. Marriage Story is the kind of film where not really that much happens in it, but it's completely engaging the whole time. I would not be surprised if in the future at some point Marriage Story is one of these films that's looked at as an acting masterclass. Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver are on screen for almost the entirety of the film, and they just knock it out the park in absolutely every scene. As a filmmaker myself, one of the things I strive for when creating short films and other projects is realism. And for me, the couple in this film could not feel more real. The dialogue feels realistic, the scenarios are things that we know people have gone through, and it just hits home as a very down-to-earth, real film. Number 3 is Tarantino's latest film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, I have to admit, I'm actually not the biggest Tarantino fan, as blasphemous as that might be to some filmmakers. I've seen almost all his films, and they are a little bit up and down for me, some which I've loved, for example Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, which I think are brilliant, and some which I've really not vibed with, such as The Hateful Eight. I think Tarantino in 2019 almost has a little bit too much leeway, and actually his films can become a little bit self-indulgent and long. But saying that, for me, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood didn't get into that territory. It is long and it is a bit slow at times, but it does take along at a nice pace. And similar to Marriage Story, it really is an acting masterclass the whole way through. The thing I found really interesting about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the links to the real life story. Now for me, if you don't know the story of Sharon Tate and Charles Manson and the horrific events that happened that night, this film might hit a little bit differently and actually might not work quite as well. I think the film relies heavily on you knowing the real life story and therefore having an expectation of where the film is going. Around the last hour of this film uses that tension and the suspense and knowing what's coming to really build a feeling of impending doom. And I think this is masterful filmmaking. When you see Charles Manson and his friends approaching the hills towards the end of the film, there is a genuine sense of horror that you know what's coming. And the fact that the film then completely twists that around and throws the ending and does something completely different, unexpected and hilarious, to me is genius, if a little insensitive to the real story. Number 4 for me is a film I really didn't expect to be as good as it was. That film is Joker. Now, I'm a big superhero fan, seen all the Marvel films, most of the DC films, unfortunately. So when this film was announced, I was a little bit skeptical as to, the quality level this film would have. But when Joaquin Phoenix was attached and when, rumours started to come out about the tone of the film and what it might kind of be like, I admit I was a lot more on board. And that absolutely carried into the final film. Similar to a lot of the films on this list, This film is an absolute masterclass in acting. Joaquin Phoenix is brilliant the whole way through. He completely engages you in that character, makes you feel all sorts of things that you probably don't even feel like you should feel towards his character, and offers a very layered performance that hasn't been seen since Heath Ledger's Joker back in the Dark Knight trilogy. The film is dark, it is quite slow paced, and it really gives you quite a good look inside the Joker's mind frame, in a way that films haven't necessarily done in the past. But again, the cinematography is brilliant, the music for me stood out massively, the score is brilliant and really adds a lot to the film. And again, the film just builds a tension and a suspense which it holds throughout, right up to the climax of the film, which offers a great look at a classic Joker story in a new way. Number 5 is a film that me and a male friend went to see midday on like a Tuesday afternoon, and we were the only men in the theatre, which is a real shame because everyone should see this film. The film is, of course, Little Women. Now, I understand this is a very, very famous story, especially in America, but being from the UK, I admit I was naive to what this story was about, which, as I've said before, is often a great way to watch a film. The cast of this film is absolutely brilliant. Emma Watson gives probably her best performance outside of Harry Potter. Saoirse Ronan is absolutely on point, as always. Florence Pugh continues to establish herself as one of the best upcoming actors on the scene. And Eliza Scanlon offers an absolutely heart-wrenching performance as Beth. The film is a really, really good look into the minds of young women, a perspective which we often don't see in films. The bonds and the sisterhood shared in the family is really special to watch. The direction from Greta Gerwig is fantastic. The film jumps around in time, but it's never confusing. It's colour-coded very clearly on screen as to whether we're in the past or the present. And the film just gave me all sorts of emotions the whole way through. As well as just being a great film, I think this is the kind of film that men need to watch. As I said, these are unrepresented stories in film. We don't often see this many female characters interacting at all, never mind being the main characters of the film. And I think there's a lot to be learned from stories like this. Number 6 is a Rian Johnson film called Knives Out. Knives Out is about as classic as a, murder mystery thriller that there is. And it's a type of film that I've not seen for quite a few years now. If you love films like Poirot or any real murder mystery stories, this is going to be right up your street. The acting is great, the pace is frantic, and it just twists and turns the whole way through. A lot of times in murder mysteries, you're kind of going, oh, I think it's this person, I think I've worked it out, and this film just completely throws away with that concept by telling you who committed the murder very early in the film. But then, as you'd expect, it twists back and forth on itself, and you never really know kind of what's going on or who's doing what, and it's just absolutely brilliant to watch. Number 7 on my list is 1917. Now, I have to admit at the start of this, I absolutely love war films. Saving Private Ryan is one of my favourite films. Dunkirk was one of my favourite films of the last couple of years, so I knew going into 1917 that I was probably prepped to like this anyway. But what the film achieves, especially with its slightly gimmicky one-shot camera style, I think is fantastic. So if you don't know, the film is shot as if it is one take. Now, if you know anything about filmmaking, you'll know that clearly that's not the case, and there's actually probably hundreds of cuts in this film, but it's all pieced together as if the camera never moves away. Now, the reason they shot it this way, and I think it really does work, is it really draws you into the characters and into the scenarios that they're in. Because you don't cut away and because you don't get a chance to kind of, take a break somewhere else in the story, you are really, really with these characters, and therefore everything they go through in this film. This means you feel very connected to the story, you feel very present in all the action, and it really just adds a lot to the film. Now, I do have a couple of tiny criticisms of this film. I do think there's times when the pacing is hit a little bit by this one-shot nature. It does mean you can't cut away for backstory or any sort of real context elsewhere. And as a filmmaker myself, there were a few times when I kind of felt that the camera angle was being limited by the one-shot nature. But I think all of those criticisms are blown away by the last section of the film, which I think is absolutely amazing. You'll probably have seen it in the trailer, but the scene where he comes out of a trench and runs along the top of no man's land with thousands of people running past him, explosions going off everywhere, music swelling, is one of the best scenes I've seen in the last couple of years. It's another great example of just how important a score can be in a film, as this moment was absolutely made for me by the music. The film is not too long, it moves along at a nice pace and gets to where it wants to go in a good time, and it's absolutely worth watching. Go and see 1917. Number 8 for me is a film that I absolutely knew I was going to love. That film is Jojo Rabbit. Now, over the last couple of years, Taika Waititi has kind of gone from being a little bit obscure to being one of the Hollywood greats. His unique style of humour mixed with his fantastic directing ability makes him, in my opinion, one of the best directors out there today. His work on Thor Ragnarok, which absolutely transformed a stale character in my opinion, let me know instantly that I was going to love whatever this guy did next. And Jojo Rabbit absolutely delivered. The film is a comedy and it is absolutely hilarious, but it's also punctuated with really sad, really emotional parts. And I think Taika is an absolute genius at being able to balance these two things so well. On paper, a comedy about a kid who has an imaginary Adolf Hitler in his head, already you're getting into kind of controversial territory. And Taika Waititi navigates that territory very, very well. The film rarely goes for shock humour, and most of the comedy is actually character-based and is a light-hearted sort of piss take at the Nazi regime. I think if this film was an all-out comedy and didn't have the more serious moments, I don't think it would have had the same effect. and I think it might have come to some criticism over making light of a situation as serious as World War II. But when the film needs to get serious, it's really, really good at bringing you into the characters, making you understand the situation that these people were in, and making you relate to not only the good guys, but also some of the people that, are not being portrayed as nice people in the film. When you mix that storytelling ability with the humour this film has, it's absolutely one of my favourite films of 2019. Number 9, and one that I feel like less people might have seen, is a film called Booksmart. This film is a coming-of-age story about two girls who are leaving high school and decide that they've kind of studied too hard and haven't really partied and haven't really enjoyed that period of their life. So they're going to go out on one wild night and change all of that. Similar to Jojo Rabbit, the film is absolutely hilarious, but also encapsulates a lot of real themes and a lot of real, serious topics surrounding growing up and being that age. The film takes a really serious look at female friendship, especially at younger age, and I think offers a real insightful look into people that age. We all went through that time period, we've all grown up, we've all had our insecurities of getting older and, trying to establish who you are as a person. This film hits all of those notes with comedy, with seriousness, with great acting, a brilliant soundtrack, and just an all-round really feel-good tone. If you just want to have a really good time with a film, Booksmart is one you need to watch. And finally, at number 10 is a film I absolutely could not miss off this list. That is, of course, the Avengers Endgame. Now, until the Marvel Cinematic Universe came around and kind of really became what it is today, I was not a massive comic book fan. As a kid, I'd grown up with films like Fantastic Four and the Spider-Man films, which I did enjoy, but I never really felt kind of got to the peak of, mainstream filmmaking and comic books and kind of, converging those 2 points. And of course, the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, and even more so the Avengers films to this point, have really kind of reached that peak now for me. There really is no other way to put it. Endgame was a cultural phenomenon, a huge moment for a lot of people. The culmination of 20 plus films and 20 plus stories that all kind of were, coming to the same point and reaching ahead at the same time. We were always likely to be in for a treat with this film, and the filmmakers absolutely delivered. One of the things that really got me into filmmaking and made me love cinema in the first place was moments in films that just give you chills. I think back to films like Lord of the Rings that have so many moments where the hairs just stand up on the back of your neck and you basically just get super hyped for what's about to happen. And I think most people would agree that Endgame delivers one of the biggest hype moments I have ever seen in film. Even to this day, having seen the film multiple times and talked about it endlessly, when I hear the piece of music, when I see the scene, when someone mentions the portal starting to open, I still get chills. For me, Endgame really delivered in giving us something that I think we all expected was going to happen. The film didn't really twist too much or offer anything particularly different, but it just paid off as the climax to such a big franchise. I know they're still making Marvel films, that's not going to stop anytime soon, and I don't want it to, but Endgame really was the end of the story for this first section of the Marvel Universe, and it really got there in the best possible way. It was very emotional to lose a few of our favourite characters in the way that we did, and it was great to see an on-screen baddie in the Marvel Universe finally have the kind of, pathos and grandeur that Thanos has in this film, and of course in Infinity War. If there's one criticism of the Marvel Universe for me, it's been that a lot of the antagonists have been a little bit forgettable and haven't really offered too much in the films. And thankfully, when it really mattered, they completely changed that with Thanos, who is a layered and interesting character the whole way through these two films. Yes, his role in Endgame is a little bit minimised, but his presence is still felt, and his downfall at the end of the film is completely satisfying. I don't think there's many people that can get through the end of Endgame without crying or shedding a tear at the very least. And I think in a lot of ways, the emotion that last kind of half an hour brings really shows how invested people got in the Marvel Universe. It's a film that I could throw in at any time and I'd probably sit there for the whole 3 hours. And for that reason, it absolutely has to be on this list. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this list of films. It's completely possible that I missed some out, probably some that I've even seen myself. If you have any suggestions for films that I might have missed that year, or films that I've seen and I've just completely missed from this list, leave them in the comments below. And on that note, I will see you next week.